Sometimes they'll mix like fruits and vegetables and meats in the same pouch. And as an adult, I'm like, that cannot taste good. But as a baby, they go for it. They love it.
Yeah, sure.
Because they're dumb. Welcome to Dadsplaining, a weekly chronicle of all the weirdest, messiest, grossest, and funniest parts of fatherhood, hosted by two first-time dads. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And today we are going to be recording episode 12 of the podcast. I like to call it Food, the other four-letter F word. We're going to be talking about breastfeeding, bottle feeding, baby foods, jars versus pouches, homemade versus store-bought, articles you may have read that are scaring the crap out of you, and why you really shouldn't be that scared. But before we get into all of that, Brandon, if our listeners want to get in touch with us, where can they find us?
Yeah, if you like what we're doing, and hopefully you do, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram as well. Check us out at Dadsplaining Podcast. If you want to go old school, you can drop us an email at dadsplainingpodcast@gmail.com.
Awesome. So, Brandon, how are things going with Noah this week?
So this has been a very pivotal week, I would say, for maybe me personally. If you've been listening, you know that I have been off on some paternity leave, hanging out with my son, Noah. But that is just ended, and so this is obviously the toughest week for me because I am back at work now. And so I have been basically dealing with that all week, so trying to get back into the rhythm of things. At work, I would say that it's actually been a little better than I thought.
Yeah. Just
because, I don't know, I've been doing it for a while, so I was able to kind of jump back into it without too much trouble. Everyone's super nice. I mean, obviously, I like the people I work with, so they've been happy to see me back. Only occasionally do to get to like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. I was like, yeah, you're right. It's been a while.
What's the, tell me this, what's the reaction been from the guys around the office? And I'm wondering kind of, how do guys in general react to the fact that you were on extended leave?
Well, I would say that at my work, we've got kind of a younger group, so younger workforce, just the industry I'm in. That's just the way it kind of goes.
Yeah.
And, obviously my company has this policy which allowed me to do it. So I think most people are kind of like in awe that I actually did it.
Yeah.
So my company's, really great. They just offered, paternity leave, kind of for the first time. And I obviously know not most companies don't do that. So most folks were just like, what was it like? Like, I can't believe you actually took 3 months off. Like, what did you do? Were you actually bored? Yes, a little bit. So, a lot of people were just happy for me. I mean, it's all about the kiddo. So, I mean, it's hard for people to be like mean about it. Like,
totally.
You spend time with your son? Ugh, how dare you? But yeah, no, I totally get what you're coming at. Like, younger folks, maybe this is a little bit more easy to absorb. And like other people are like, I never had that in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like what I noticed when I came back, of course, my leave was much shorter. It was only like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But I noticed there was like the folks that are more my age, they get it more.
Yeah, for sure.
Kind of, they live in the world that we live in and all that fun stuff. And then some of the older folks, like they're supportive, like they're not like, mad at me or anything, but they don't really get it. They can't really wrap it. They're like, well, what are you doing all day? Like, what do you need? Because, probably when they were kids, their dad, maybe popped into the hospital to see them get born and then headed right back to work the next day. Because he was the only one, making money. He didn't have that option. And, it was just a different time. So they have a different frame of reference. But you're right. Like the younger folks, they kind of get it. They understand why it's important, why, in a lot of ways it's necessary, why it's really beneficial. And this is something that we've talked about extensively in other episodes, like why it's so good for you, for the mom, for the baby, for everybody to take off as much time as you can in those early couple of months to be there with the kid.
Yeah, definitely. And, one of the things I do want to mention, one of the kind of challenges, I guess, of going back to work, you always think about, it's going to be tough to get back into the groove of things and whatnot. But really, in this first week, I've obviously been kind of aware of the fact that I'm going from spending a ton of time with my son to almost no time. And, that sounds really pessimistic, but that's kind of the way you feel. And, I want to get your take, Jesse, on if that was kind of similar for you, but like, it's been hard for me to not to justify, but you have those thoughts that probably every parent does of like, well, because I've chosen to work, I don't get to spend time with my kids. And if you really think about it, because I'm kind of an analytical person, so I start thinking and doing the math, and I'm like, well, really, I wake up and I see my son, but then he goes off to daycare pretty quick. So I kind of just get to say, hey, and then he comes home, or I come home, and I have maybe 2 hours before he has to go to bed. So like every day I only get 2 hours. Like that seems minimal.
Yeah. No, it's an area where I've failed a lot, but I've kind of figured out ways to kind of game the system in favor of my family. So what I've started doing is I will get up around 4:30 in the morning to get ready for work, and I'll leave before my kid gets up, which is the downside. I don't get to see him except on rare occasions when he wakes up early.
Oh yeah.
And then I go to work, and then I get off work around 3 o'clock, so I get to pick up my son from daycare and then spend the rest of the day with him. So I get him
That's nice.
in those afternoon hours, and we've talked about before how by the end of the day, oftentimes you don't have much of that mental energy left, and sometimes neither does your kid. But what I've noticed is that since we've put David in daycare, he still has plenty of energy to spare at the end of the day, and so do I.
Yeah.
And so does my wife, because now that we're both back at work and back into the swing of things, and we're not watching him and making sure he stays alive all day long, we've got a lot more energy to give him to do that quality versus quantity time in the afternoon. So I probably get, if I see him at 4:30 to pick him up, I get him until 8 o'clock whenever he falls asleep, which is, it's not a whole lot more time than what you're getting. And of course the sacrifice of that is you have to get up like crazy early in order to make it happen. But the plus side is there's no traffic on the roads at 6 o'clock in the morning. So, there's that.
Nice. Yeah, I think even if you have the more limited time, even in this short period of time of the first week, I've definitely gone through the ups and the downs. Like I've been on the mental roller coaster of like, I'm never seeing my kid. Like, why am I doing this to myself? There's got to be a better way. But then also the same thing that I'm finding that as soon as I get home, I'm just excited to see him. Yeah. And I want to spend all of my time when I'm home with him, just playing with him, just doing nothing. And nothing else comes to mind that I'd rather be doing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just been fun. So that's been the emotions that I've kind of been going through. I'm sure a lot of working parents going back to work for the first time can kind of empathize with that, but just wanted to say, hey, man, it's challenging.
Yeah,
going back to work.
Definitely, totally agree.
And then the last bit that's been really exciting for us is that my son rolled over for the first time.
No way!
Yes,
From
sir.
back to front.
Back to front.
That's awesome.
He did the big one. He did the big one. The front to back kind of just happens accidentally because it's not really stable there. But the back to front, really like 2 days ago, I want to say.
Congratulations.
And like I wasn't ready for it. Like a lot of the times he'll kind of like kick himself to the side and then just get stuck there. And so he started doing it, and I wasn't really ready. No one expects the moment to happen.
Totally.
And then he's on his front again. I'm just like doing a double take. Like, the heck just happened?
Yeah.
But
How'd you get there?
Yeah, exactly. It's such a simple thing. I don't know why we're excited about it as much as we are. Like rolling over, but
there's
like
a big reason to be excited.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of the big development. But like, hey, you're on your front now. So that was a big deal for us. What's it been like for you guys, Jesse?
So in the past week, we graduated David to his first big boy bath. Ooh. So we probably kept him in the baby size bath a little longer maybe than most parents do. There's different brands of bathtubs you can get for your infant, and some of them have different features. Ours had a thermometer built into it. It had 3 little drains, so it like the water pours into one spot and then it sort of waterfalls into where he is, and there's like it's foam padded seats and it's curved just right, so as he grows up he kind of fits into it well, and then he can kind of sit up in it, which is really nice. So he is a little over 10 months now, and a few nights ago we put him in the bathtub without that, and instead we had sort of a little seat for him to sit in, kind of a rubber seat that sort of cups him so he can sit up, and then the water is maybe up to not even if he's sitting up, maybe it's up to his knees kind of. Yeah. So there's plenty of room for him to get on all fours and splash around without any danger of him being, up to his chest or anything like that. And of course, he's very mobile right now. So he sits in the seat for a minute, and then he immediately gets off of it and crawls over to the edge and like pulls himself up because he loves to pull himself up right now. And he had a lot of fun. He's splashing around. We got a whole bunch of toys. We got this little whale thing to stick on the faucet. So instead of it looks like water coming out of the faucet, it looks like a whale vomiting water. I don't know. But it,
it's geysering. Yeah, that's what they
exactly.
do, right? The blowhole. Yeah, but the mouth. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, it was just really cool. And we even have like a little net. So at the end of it, my wife takes this sort of fisher's net and scoops up all the animal floaty toys that are floating around. So it's all kind of a game, and and he enjoyed it. He actually enjoyed it so much that when we pulled him out, he wanted to get back in. So we put him back in there for a few extra minutes.
That's
and
awesome.
Let him have some fun. So it was a really positive experience.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, no, bath time is like a great time of day. And, doing it every night. But like, it's kind of difficult when they can't sit themselves up or kind of control themselves. You really only want to keep it to like as long as it takes to clean them, which can be like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But they enjoy the heck out of it. And what's funny is like you mentioned all the cool toys. Like the toy that we have gotten that my son has enjoyed the most is like these little styrofoam letters, like which is a couple of letters of the alphabet. And so it's like not even much of a toy really, but like he just loves them because right now his big thing is just like, can I eat this? Yes, no. But he doesn't do the yes, no. He just goes yes.
Yeah.
He just goes ham on it. So like anything we give him that he can eat, and these are perfect, he can just like shove them in his mouth like halfway.
Right.
Because it's like an X, like you can't get the whole thing.
Sure.
Or like a Z. So he just plays with those, and like when you pull him out of the bath, he's like still holding it, and he just hangs on to it as long as he can until you like start putting clothes on him. He actually has to drop it.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and dig into today's subject. We're going to be talking about a variety of topics related to feeding your child. Everything from breastfeeding to bottle feeding to our experiences with those, and then on to baby foods. And I'm going to talk about an article that came out recently from Consumer Report about things that were found in most major brands of baby foods, and something that probably parents read the headlines and they panic a lot. And we're here to say, yes, there's some concern, but really there's no reason to panic. So, Brandon, what has the feeding experience been like with you guys? I know Noah is roughly 6 months old now, and you're preparing, if I understand this, to graduate to solid foods soon, right?
We're getting ready for that mark because he will be 6 months in like a week. So yeah, that's generally speaking, 6 months is about the prescribed time of when you can start exploring solids. And it's not saying that they won't ever choke on it, but like they can kind of handle the chewing motion more or less with solid food. So we're about at that point. So we haven't started it yet. We're excited for getting to that point. But yeah, I definitely want to talk a little bit about what the experience has been like up until that point. So all of the feeding that you do prior to moving to solids. So that's breastfeeding and bottle feeding, some combination of the two, one or the other, depending on your mileage. And really the main thing I want to talk about is, some of the challenges and some of the positives of the experience, because there's always both of those things. Like anything you do with a kid involves good and some bad.
Yeah.
And so the positives has obviously been that, feeding and doing that kind of feeding, whether it's breast or bottle feeding, is some of the best bonding time that we've ever had. And personally, for me at least, like kids are cute all the time, but they're kind of the cutest when they're eating for me. Like something about the sucking motion with them, like whether it's on a bottle or the boob, whatever it is, like that, they just look completely adorable because it's like the most babyest thing, most babyest thing.
Yeah, we could use it as an adjective.
Yeah, there you go. It's the most baby thing that they can be doing. So it's a lot of fun, and I know that maybe dads don't think about themselves being involved in feeding, but I have really enjoyed bottle feeding because it gets you a chance as a dad to do it, because you're not going to be involved in the breastfeeding. It's just the way biology works, guys. And so it's been a lot of fun to be able to do that for myself. And obviously, even if you're bottle feeding, well, not even, but let me just say that you can still bottle feed with breast milk, which is what we've been doing. So we're almost 6 months in, and we've been doing exclusively breast milk thus far, with challenges. It's not all sunshine and roses, but I mean, that's been really good, because one of the keys of doing breast milk is all the nutrients, all the good benefits for the kids that comes with that versus, say, formula or something else.
Gotcha.
So a lot of positives. What did you find about the bottle breastfeeding phase, Jesse?
So breastfeeding was something that we didn't really have a ton of challenges throughout that process. Of course, we're still doing it, and we will be doing it probably until he's it varies, from day to day what we kind of decide. But my wife's thinking, I think around 15 months is what we've talked about. And of course, you can go longer. I've heard people say that they want to continue breastfeeding up until 2 years, which A lot of moms may want to do that. A lot of moms may not want to do that. But
yeah, I definitely want to talk about the want to do it versus the practicality of doing it.
Well, and there's also, the one challenge we've had with breastfeeding is once the child learns to bite, that becomes a big pain point.
Yeah, it's a bit of a turnoff.
Yeah. So that's something that my wife's like, oh man, I'll breastfeed him forever, and then chomp. He's like, okay, he's off now. Cutting him off. Cold turkey.
Have you gotten to do a good bit of bottle feeding along the way? Like you enjoyed that experience?
Oh, I love it. Not a ton, but usually it's on days where, for instance, if I'm home alone with the kid, or there was a couple months ago, my wife had to take a work trip for a couple of days, so she pumped a lot of breast milk and kept it with me, and I would warm it up in the bottle warmer, and then I would bottle feed him, and that's something that he took to pretty well as well. Actually, that's something that's probably an unusual case. Like, a lot of kids will have some trouble adapting to it if they're used to a nipple. So if you, as a dad, grab your baby for the first time to bottle feed him and he screams bloody murder, it's not because he doesn't love you or because you're a bad dad. It's just because, it's just not the real thing. But David didn't have a whole lot of problems with it. He takes to it. He drinks pretty fast, actually.
Yeah, my son, the same situation. Like, he's really taken to bottle feeding, but I do want to talk about some of the challenges that comes with breastfeeding, which can lead to bottle feeding. Like, obviously, if you're feeding from the bottle, there might be some issue with why you couldn't do breastfeeding. And it can be a challenge because there's this kind of innate feeling that breastfeeding is obviously the natural way. It's the way that's traditional, it's expected. And I think that's kind of the stigma around it is actually quite strong. I think we talk a little bit about, like, people's opinions on, like, how you should take care of your kids. We don't tend to have judgment on this show. It doesn't do anybody any good. And it's not, I don't think it's right for you to judge anybody on how they raise their kid. So that's one of the challenges, is that challenge between wanting to or feeling like you need to breastfeed versus acknowledging that for a lot of people there are going to be challenges that kind of prevent you from doing it in some ways. So for us, one of the challenges was right out of the gate. We have technically had to, bottle feed almost from the get-go, from when my son was born.
Yeah.
Because he initially had a tongue tie when he was born. And so that really limited his ability to latch for breastfeeding. And then even if he could kind of latch, it limited his ability to, suck and like actually get a good feed going. So we did correct that, within like a week of him being born. And that's not very fun. They kind of have to clip the part that's holding the tongue to the mouth.
Yeah.
But that made obviously a big difference because it was really just untenable, period, without doing that. And then he was able to progressively learn to latch, but we had to go through quite a lot to get to that point. And so I want to highlight that there's, by no one's fault, you can run into just natural challenges.
Sure.
You could have the issue like the tongue tie, and even if you fix that, it's still a challenge because we basically had to then train him to latch. We had to go to, lactation consultants to help us with that and like kind of get him up to speed on feeding well. For some kids, it's kind of innate. It just works.
Yeah.
Hats off to you. That's great. I hope that for everyone, but it doesn't happen for all of us.
Right.
And so we had to do, and I say we, but obviously my wife had to, start pumping from pretty much day one to be able to produce some milk that we could then feed to him in a way in which he could actually take it, which for us was often bottle feeding because he was fine, taking the bottle. And so it was maybe a little easier for him. So sometimes what we run into is that it's actually easier for him to take bottle-fed milk than breast because he doesn't have to work as hard.
Yeah.
The bottle, you just kind of stick it in, and they just can suck on it.
And it's also typically tilted kind of above him, so you got gravity working.
You use that gravity for him. Like, it's all kind of just there for him. And they actually have to work at breastfeeding. And so that's something that I don't think people maybe inherently realize is that breastfeeding is probably the hardest form of baby feeding because there's a lot of work that the baby has to do, and there can be plenty of, minute issues that make it a lot harder to breastfeed.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been the challenge for us. And then the other thing is just over time. how well they progress with learning to feed, because as our son has grown, he needs to eat more. So you go from feeding him, an ounce, 2 ounces, 3 ounces, 4 ounces per feed. So then you need to then produce more. And the one of the things that's been the most challenging for us is keeping up with that supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that if he's needing more, you then have to produce more. I say you, we're talking about the moms, in case anyone forgot.
Yeah.
So, my wife has to keep up with this. She has to naturally have more when he wants it, or then pump some and then give it to him. So you get into a very tenuous game of feeding them on the breast and then maybe pumping as well to like save up some stock, because sometimes they may need more or less when they try to breastfeed and you may not have that right amount. So maybe if you have too much, you want to pump so that you can store it up for later. So it's a kind of a constant game, and not like kind of a hard game, and can be a little, it can certainly be draining on the moms.
Yeah.
And, so a lot of this I'm bringing up from the mom perspective, but like dads, you have to know about this to kind of appropriately support what's really going on. And also just because I don't think there should be any stigma or judgment around if you can or cannot breastfeed, because it's not going to be most of the time in your control. Some people can decide not to do it at all. I get it. That's fine. Used to be like the go-to logic, but you should never judge someone because you don't know what's going on with them.
Right. And, it's also important to remember that no one route is going to make or break the kid. They all have their pros and cons. Breastfeeding, if it's something that you can do, it's got a lot of great benefits for the kid that you may not get from other forms of feeding. But, if you have to feed through a bottle, he's still getting breast milk.
Yeah.
If you have to feed formula, he's still getting the nutrients. I know that actually for most of my life as a baby, my mom couldn't breastfeed me because I think it was because I had jaundice at the time. So it was a health thing. Like I think I wasn't compatible with her milk, and it had something to do with that. Like it would make me sick.
Interesting. Gotcha.
So I went to formula basically instantly.
Right.
And, I turned out fine. I'm maybe not there 100% mentally, but, for the most part, I turned out fine.
Yep.
But, there are a million different routes, whatever you choose to take, either because you have to or just because it's the one you're the most comfortable with. And then also keep in mind, really, it's whatever your wife is most comfortable with. Don't pressure her to go one way or another because, it's not your boobs.
Right. Yeah.
So,
and
just
there's,
something.
There's so much that goes into it because, feeding is, can feel great, but I mean, it's, it's work.
Yeah.
It's hard work. And then pumping as well, that does not feel good.
No. Neither does being bitten by a child with,
or being bitten by a pump either.
Oh, yeah,
that's
exactly.
Just sucking on it in an unpleasant way.
Yeah.
So none of it's fun, really, to put it too fine a point on it. And I just want to, finish with the thought that basically it's up to the job of the dads to be just supportive in general, because it's really hard to, Jesse, you pointed out, something that was, correct, that if you're bottle feeding your breast milk, you're still giving them breast milk.
Right.
They're still getting the nutrients. Totally right. But that doesn't mean that, your wife, your partner isn't going to feel like, why couldn't I just handle that myself?
Exactly.
From breastfeeding.
Yeah.
So the toughest moment so far for us has been around that, like trying to get talk and understand as the man. Basically, I like to feel like I'm solving problems if something comes up with the kid. Like if I'm bottle feeding, I feel like I'm helping. Because like I'm giving something my son needs, and my wife can take a break, or she can pump or whatever she needs to do to help that. But if she then feels that she couldn't produce it and she couldn't do it herself, it's tough. That's a completely natural feeling, but it's really hard. It's been hard for me to connect with that because I can't feel that.
Right.
I can't feel anything about breastfeeding. I can't have those feelings, but it's tough. I mean, it really hurts. It really hurts, both of us to be feeling like you're somehow inadequate as a parent. There's nothing worse than feeling inadequate as a parent or incompetent, and especially when something is supposedly natural, like breastfeeding, and if you're having trouble with it, like, you don't need to feel like you're a failure, or you're something should be innate in you and you can't do it and you haven't succeeded in some way, but you got to be able to overcome that.
Right. Well, and it's really similar to okay, so here's the case where mothers are sometimes damned if they do and damned if they don't. You may hear from older generations, formula is better than breast milk. Breastfeeding is not something you have to do, and it's something that only women who can't afford formula do. That was a mentality for a long time, and it was upheld by doctors telling women to go for formula instead of breast milk, probably because they were getting a kickback from the formula industry. But that's a topic for another day. But there's a parallel here to childbirth and how women who need to go through cesarean sections or other forms of assisted birth and interventions, oftentimes they feel like they didn't actually have their baby, and there's a stigma against that, and it's not really talked about. You never really hear women openly judging other women, or men openly judging women for having C-sections and things like that, but there's sort of that unspoken stigma there of that versus natural birth that a lot of women who have that go through. And really, it's like, no matter where they go, if they have the vaginal birth, they're worried about their husbands oftentimes feeling weird about the fact that a baby went through there, and then they can't look at them sexually anymore. As a husband, as a dad, that's one thing you got to keep in mind, especially when you're helping the mother make decisions on what to do. There is that there's a lot of pressure no matter which way they go, and they feel like they're dodging bullets sometimes. So, not to be on such a down note, but it's one area where you can kind of take a step back, let them make their own decision, and then support them no matter which way they go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we can cap it off on the breastfeeding topic by just saying, like, we're proud of our wives. Like, wow, they're doing it. Like, I mean, it's freaking ridiculous. Like, 6 months, and, you can say, like, oh, it's only 6 months. Some people do years. Every single day, guys, multiple times a day. Yeah. Especially in the early going, like 8-10 times a day, every night. If you're not feeding, you're pumping. Like, oh my God.
You don't get weekends off.
Freaking day. No, there's no break. Yeah. They always want more. They always want the boob.
There's no PTO. You got to do it every single freaking day. So yeah, hats off to the moms that are feeding and pumping and all that jazz. Graduating from the breast to solid foods, and of course it's not a graduation because you're doing both for a long time.
Sure.
And I know that's something you're getting ready to do, and that's something that we've been doing for about 4 months now. When you get to that stage, there's a million questions because there's a million ways that you can go. There's jars of food, there's organic versus non-organic, there's pouches, there's meats and fruits and vegetables and weird combinations of them all. So Brandon, now that you guys are looking at solid foods, have you started doing any research into that and made any decisions?
So we've been thinking about it, of course, because you know that you're kind of coming up on it once you get around the 6-month mark. And we've had a couple of conversations, and I think we've come to a couple of different thoughts, right? In that maybe one of the things that we're interested in is making some of our own baby food and trying that. Totally. But again, not as the exclusive way, because you never want to box yourself into a hole. I talked about the supply and demand problem. Don't ever get into a position where you're like, oh, I'm only going to do it this way. Like, don't feel bad about caving, quote unquote, and like going to something else.
Yeah, well, that's a big commitment to make all of your child's
for
food,
sure,
because they eat a lot.
Yeah. But I want to try it, just see how it goes. I mean, it seems kind of interesting. And also, we're at that naive stage where we're like, hey, we can totally do this. So we'll report back on how successful we were. But one of the other things that we've been discussing is something that's referred to as baby-led weaning. And so the general gist here is that, once you get onto solids, you can go like the route of jars, pouches, homemade, whatever it is. But depending on what you're doing, you are basically feeding the kid that product, or you're waiting until they tell you, hey, I'm hungry, feed me. So baby-led weaning is basically a thought of, instead of preparing the kid like a pouch or a jar or even some homemade something, you can just let them kind of get exposed to what you're eating on your plate. Of course, making sure that it's, like smaller, kind of bite size for a kid,
Right.
and like definitely cooked, like no medium rare burgers or anything, but like letting them kind of explore what you have, and basically if they feel interested in it, they will go grab it, pick it up, and start eating it. So they kind of eat off your plate is the idea of baby-led weaning, and that lets the kids decide, like, you know, when they're hungry, they'll go for it, what they might be interested in eating. It kind of lets them explore a little bit. So it sounds kind of interesting, and it sounds kind of fun. Like it's an interesting way to maybe kind of create like a family dinner aspect to it, instead of like you feeding them something and then you eating your food. Like everyone's kind of eating the same thing. It seems weird to me that you can do this so early, but apparently you can do this. It's a viable option. So that's kind of exciting. But one thing I do want to mention is that I did try, I knew we were gonna talk about this today. I did try to look up and see, like, what does the science say about baby-led weaning? Like, what's the research out there? And the net is really that it's inconclusive, which is, I think, the way it is with a lot of things.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned it, Jesse, like there's many routes you can go, and you can pick any of them. Totally fine one way or the other. We grew up probably on like jars of like Gerber baby food, and we're talking about baby-led weaning, and maybe that wasn't in vogue 20 years ago. So there's been some research on it, but it's not been deep enough with enough data, with enough research where there's anything definitive to say like, oh, baby-led weaning does promote better eating or more varied eating. Those are kind of the thoughts behind it.
Yeah.
So we're interested to try it out.
And it sounds like it's something that is probably what you might supplement other forms of feeding with, because I don't know. I haven't done much research into it, but I guess you wouldn't be able to give your kid an entire meal just as the scraps sort of off of what you're eating. I'm guessing.
Yeah, no. And you're right, because it supplements, again, with breast milk. Like breast milk doesn't go away, or formula or whatever you're doing for feeding, that doesn't go away. The solids just become a supplement. So like with when your kids are initially born, they start with a small amount and then they kind of graduate. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I mean, it just sounds fun.
That's awesome.
And we're kind of interested in trying it. What's been your experience so far?
Right. So we have been, we started out around 6 months with jars, and we went with the Earth's Best brand, which you can get at Target, as well as Kroger, which is where we do the majority of our grocery shopping these days. And then we also incorporated pouches from Happy Baby. They have a lot of great different varieties of flavors, different foods that are mixed together in weird ways. I've talked about this in other episodes where sometimes they'll mix like fruits and vegetables and meats in the same pouch. And as an adult, I'm like, that cannot taste good. But as a baby, they go for it. They love it.
Yeah, sure.
Because they're dumb. David, if you hear this later, you're not dumb. I'm sorry. That
David,
was a
if you
joke.
hear this later, you were dumb. No. You're smart now, hopefully.
But they have different stages. Like they have baby's first peas and baby's first...
Baby's first what? I'm sorry?
Peas.
Pea?
Oh, my God.
What are you feeding him?
Peas. Green peas.
Green peas. Okay. Vegetables.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes. So, and what your doctors may tell you is start off with single foods before you mix foods together, because that's a good way of figuring out what their stomachs can handle, what they may have allergies to, which is most likely not going to be fruits and vegetables. It's going to be like eggs and and things like that, peanut butter, and nuts and legumes and things like that. But you start out with peas, potatoes, turkey, chicken, different vegetables, things like that. That of course they're finely pureed. They're very thin, and then from there we moved on to, I think we gave him what they call it cereal, but it's not what you think of cereal. It's like almost like unflavored oatmeal that you mix with breast milk, and you let them try that, and that's just a different texture for them to experience. And of course, it's like if you've ever had oatmeal without any sugar or cinnamon or salt or anything.
Delicious, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Mixing a little breast milk on top, yum, yum.
But babies love it, and he did okay with it. It's not something that we feed him regularly anymore because he didn't really care for it. But now he's at the stage where we're giving him jars of mixed foods. Like we'll give him like fruits in the morning, and then lunch will be like a fruit and vegetable combo, and then in the evening we may give him something like apples, sweet potatoes, and turkey, or chicken and brown rice dinner, things like that. We give him jars and spoon feed, and we also give him pouches. And what's cool about the pouches is that the kids will eventually learn to feed themselves with it.
Right.
They'll take it in their hand and they'll suck it down like it's a Capri Sun without the straw. It's really cool. And like the downside is it gets a little messy because as soon as they're done, they'll pop it out of their mouth and they'll shake it all around and throw it on the ground. But so, I mean, in general, the process of giving solids to David has been pretty positive. He has not really responded negatively to very much. Some things he didn't care for were when we tried giving him homemade pureed avocado. Some kids love this, and it's something that, I mean, every parent should try. Buy an avocado, get it, fine, like a guacamole, where it's kind of thick, but not too thick. I think we maybe didn't make ours thin enough, and that's why he didn't love it. But, if they don't love something, they'll tell you right away. Like, they'll cry, they'll push it away, they'll grab the spoon and throw it on the ground. So he has a very vocal reaction to things he doesn't like, but there's really not much that he doesn't like. And recently, we have, around the 10-month mark, introduced him to strawberries and bananas. The brand Munchkin makes what's called a fresh food feeder. And the way it works is, on the outside, it almost looks like a pacifier with a thing attached to the end of it. Like there's a handheld bit, and then there's a thing that you put the food in. So it's good for bananas, strawberries, sort of soft-skinned or no-skinned fruit. We put a strawberry in it. And the way it works is he can take that and put the rubber side in his mouth like a pacifier and kind of chew it. And there's no risk of him getting any solids in his mouth, so there's no choking hazard. But he is kind of mashing it up and getting it through the pores and getting the food that way. So he gets all of the experience of chewing on solid food without any of the dangers. And it was weird with the strawberries. Like, he liked it at first. And then as it went on, he started to get fussy. He started to cry, and then he would take it and throw it on the ground. We'd pick it up, give it back to him, he'd throw it again. He'd get really upset, and of course, at the same time, he's covered in strawberry juice, so it looks like the set of Game of Thrones or something. Like, there's just red wedding blood everywhere.
No,
Spoiler
alert. Don't do that.
And then the next day, we gave him banana, and we chopped up the banana into really small, bite-sized bites, and really, he loved playing with it more than he loved eating it, but he didn't mind the food. The only downside was he did get one piece caught in his throat, so my wife had to act quickly and kind of dislodge it and help him to swallow it, and he was fine. But it's you really with introducing the real solids, you have to kind of be very careful with it and make sure you're making the pieces small enough. And of course, this is something that you'll also learn with baby led weaning.
Sure.
Whatever you're giving them off your plate, you got to make sure it's soft enough, small enough, because although they can chew, they've only got like 2 teeth max, at that point, and they haven't really gotten down the chewing and swallowing part, and they're not old enough for you to explain to them how to chew and swallow, so they're just kind of doing it by animal instinct.
Yeah. Hey, Timmy, don't choke on that. I got a really serious question to ask you about the feeding. So when you're feeding, spoon feeding, do you go with the choo-choo train or the airplane?
I did a mix at first, and then I naturally defaulted to the airplane, and I probably don't do the most politically correct airplane. It's not,
politically correct airplane?
It's a plane going down. It's
oh gosh, you're doing like a kamikaze, like a dive bomb.
I'm doing like a plane crash, and it's he's not old enough to understand,
but he likes it. Does he respond to it?
Yeah, he loves it. So anytime I make the whistling sound, he knows there's food coming. So I don't have to explain to him that the Wright brothers aren't going to make it through this one.
Oh my gosh!
But no, we've gone the plane route, which is also fun because you get to kind of fly the spoon all around, and he enjoys that.
Nice.
So one thing I want to touch on right now is an article that came out from Consumer Report recently, and a lot of the parents listening to this may have already seen this because it made the rounds on all of the news shows and blogs and things like that, and it was something that a lot of people got up in arms over. Consumer Report published a study of 50 nationally distributed types of packaged baby foods. Okay. A lot of these were from underneath the same brand, same manufacturer. It was a variety of jarred foods and solid foods, organic and non-organic. And what they found was that a majority of them contained what they call potentially dangerous levels of heavy metals. And heavy metals are things like cadmium, lead, inorganic arsenic, so arsenic that isn't naturally occurring or has some sort of synthetic sort of aspect to it. And the danger there is chronic exposure to these metals can lead to long-term health risks. Could potentially be things like even cancer or, certain deficiencies and illnesses and things like that. It's something where I'll post a link in the show notes, but with a word of caution, take this with a grain of metal-free salt. This is not something that is immediately putting your kid in jeopardy. If you look at this article and then you look at the jars of baby food in your pantry and you say, oh my God, I've been feeding my kids these, I'm a horrible parent, like forget that thought. Because your kid's not going to get sick because you've been giving them this certain type of baby food for the past couple of weeks. And it's not about like immediately stop either. It's the people who conducted the study for Consumer Report actually went out and gave some interviews to blogs and news shows and things like that to say, don't misunderstand. The issue is not an immediate hazard to your kid's life. The issue is what they call chronic exposure versus acute exposure. So what they say is consistent exposure without variety over the course of months or years can lead to risks. But introducing variety into your kid's diet, a mixture of brands, types of foods, introducing homemade food, stuff that you make yourself, as well as cereal and things like that, and then weaning out some of the more dangerous types. And they list anything sweet potato, which is ironic because if your kids are anything like my kid, sweet potato is the winner. Like it's the popular one. But that and anything with rice is going to have a higher probability of containing these metals. And that's not just in baby food. Like rice in general is typically tests higher for things like arsenic, really just because of the way it's farmed and raised. And there's a couple of distinctions that have to be made. Like where does this come from? And they say, well, it comes from both on a broad scale where this stuff is being produced and farmed. Stuff that is made from vegetables and fruits farmed near big cities are more likely to have heavy metals, but also even within a farm way out in the country, if the patch where the sweet potatoes are being grown is near a barn that was painted with lead paint 50 years ago, that paint may have seeped into the ground, into the soil, and then that's where that's coming from. So there's not really a great way to avoid it just by buying locally sourced or what have you. And really, organic versus non-organic doesn't make a difference, they found with this study. The organic baby foods that are prepackaged are just as at risk as the non-organic baby foods. So, although organic food does have benefits in some ways, not necessarily in this way. But the big thing I want to get across is things like this will come out about every topic. And sometimes it's worth thinking about. Like this, I think it's worth thinking about. It's not worth panicking about. Sometimes it's not even worth thinking about because an opinion may come out today that giving your kids food that was microwaved will cause cancer. And then the next day they will say giving your kids food that you chopped up with a knife will cause cancer.
Right.
Take it all with a grain of salt, fact check, look at multiple sources. What I had to do was I read the report and I kind of panicked. And then I read the blogs about the report where they actually went out and interviewed Consumer Report and got their analysis, their take on what they reported to finally sort of calm myself down. And of course, my wife, naturally, as always, is the voice of reason. Like I say to her, hey, did you see this article? And like I've got sort of that tone of panic in my voice. And she's like, yeah, I saw it like 3 weeks ago. Where were you? And then also like, don't worry about it. Like, what they say is introduce variety. Don't make that the only thing your kid eats, and he'll be fine. You know. And then also what they say is exposure over months and years. Well, your kid is probably not going to stay on that type of food for years. So maybe don't panic so much.
Yeah. So make sure when you see the scary headline to obviously read deep into it to actually get the gist of it. And there are things you can do. You can phase these things out of their diet, as you kind of mentioned with some of the maybe more likely to contain metal items. RIP sweet potatoes, sad day. But you can make the choice to rotate that out. But even if you didn't or haven't, or you've been doing it for months, you're not a criminal. Yeah. You're fine. Yeah. You're going to be okay.
So before we close out today, I want to go through some comments. I posted a question to Facebook. I wanted to find out from folks, what is your favorite type of baby food, your favorite brand? How do you feed your baby? What has not worked at all? And I got some interesting comments. So first came from Angie, who says, it's been a while since mine was a baby, but she loved pears and bananas. And then when she got a little older, she hated any meat. And that was stressful. And of course, that is stressful because in many cases, you're encouraged to give your kids certain meats because that's like where they're going to get certain nutrients from. And there's other ways you can go about it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to give your kid meat and they're very averse to it, yeah, I understand that can be stressful. Tony says, fresh avocado. Ours always loved that. Well, mine not so much, but I think that a lot of kids do love avocado, especially when it's fresh and when it's nice and thin, not too thick like ours probably was. So, Brandon, I want to hear from you in a while once you've had the chance to give Noah avocado. I want to hear how he reacted to it.
All right.
Sam says they get the pouch of baby foods from Aldi. It's organic. It costs 79 cents, and they have good fruit and veggie mixtures to sneak into the vegetables. And then a few that have meat, plus no spoon required, which is a win for me since I'm always on the go. Yeah, that's cool. And that's something I mentioned is that when you have pouches, they may not figure it out right away, but eventually the kid will figure out how to feed themselves with it. It's probably also really good for long car trips, where you don't want to stop every hour and a half or whatever and to breastfeed, or to solid food feed with a jar and a spoon, train them to use the pouches.
Yeah, and things that are just easier as a parent can be addictive to do. And good tip on Aldi, by the way. Love shopping there for the diapers. I never thought that I would like diapers that are, quote, cheap like that. But I'm definitely going to look out for the baby food now.
Aldi's got some crazy awesome finds. Like you can go in there and find like patio furniture right next to the frozen fish. Like it's crazy, but it's all really good
right
and
next
really
to the
cheap.
Dr. Thunder.
Yeah. Karina, one of our all-star listeners, commented, and this is kind of a cool tip. She says, I bought a baby bretza. Stuff whatever food in there and press a button. It steams and then purees the food. I actually think it ended up cheaper overall because I used veggies and fruits that I already had. Also, if the baby breastfed, they're used to seasoning in food, which jarred baby food doesn't usually have. So when I couldn't make it, I used I think the Beech Nut brand or the Sprout brand. Which I think those are good brands. I don't think we've really used those. We've tried them from time to time. And for what it's worth, big brands like Beech Nut, Earth's Best, Sprout, Gerber, those are all brands that study from Consumer Report mentioned as being at risk and various levels based on whether it's fruit or meat or vegetable or whether it's jar or pouch. But again, no reason to freak out, just something to look over and make sure that that's not the only thing that your kid's getting. But like Karina says, work in the fresh stuff, work in the real stuff that you are pureeing yourself, and there you go. And then we got a comment from Autumn Pritz Fisher, who, of course, our listeners may know from the Von Hessler Doctrine, weekdays from 9 to noon on News 95.5 and AM 750 WSB. She says you could always try some baby Led Weaning. It's cheaper. Of course,
Hey.
Brandon is going to be trying that himself. And then Karina responded to her and said, I did that with my second child. She's still an amazing eater. So, that's something that, based on all this feedback, I think me and Ashley are going to have to try this out ourselves, at least look into it and see. One thing we have done with him is we started to give him little tiny bites of things we're eating. So we were snacking on some bread recently, and we had to make sure that it was small enough and soft enough to where it would dissolve in his mouth. And he went for it, and he loved it, and he actually wanted more, which becomes a problem because once a kid likes something and he sees that you have it, you're never gonna get any peace again.
Or when you run out of it.
Oh yeah. Oh, God be with you.
What do you mean I'm out? What do you mean you're out, Dad?
Okay, so that's all the time we have for today's episode. Brandon, what are we going to talk about next week?
We're going to talk about routines, getting your kids on a schedule, which can be very, very helpful for parents because I think we naturally crave routines. And kids in the very early days are super unpredictable. So we'll talk a little bit about our individual experiences, what I've done with my son on getting him on a routine, and Jesse will talk about what you guys have been doing.
Yeah, definitely. So once again, if you're not already, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and be sure to give us a review and a rating on whatever podcasting app you're using to find this podcast. So until next time, I'm Jesse.
And I'm Brandon.
And hey, Brandon, I got a joke for you. What is the loneliest kind of cheese?
The sad cheese? No, what?
Provolone.
What? Oh, God.
Sorry.
Oh,
Thanks
my
for
God.
listening.